So here we are now, presenting on episode 8, the 8th installment of the story of Sandy Point, where we continue to feature segments of an interview done with Mr. Sylvia Mills last year. So do enjoy as we present on the story of Sandy Point.
I wish they would introduce moral instruction.
That was part of the curriculum?
It was part of the curriculum, a subject called moral instruction. Nowadays it's integrated maybe into the social studies. They put everything together called social studies, civics, geography, history. That is under the curriculum under social studies. That is my understanding. But there was a time when there was a subject called moral instruction. And there were topics: honesty, good manners, perseverance, patriotism, and to tell you the truth, I remember some of the slogan. There was one, truthfulness. If you are once found to be untruthful, people may not believe you even when you speak the truth. And I always remember that. And then there were other topics. Honesty is the best policy. And this one, perseverance. If at first you don't succeed, try again. So there were certain topics, and we used to learn them and we tried to act up to them. But that subject, I don't even know that the teachers moral instruction anymore.
At what level of school was that?
Everybody, from the lowest level up. They had it at the various levels. At the lower level, you were taught how to do so, how to behave, how to please and thank you, and all those sort of things. As you go higher, you were taught at whatever you're supposed to do. I do not know why they took out moral instruction, because it is needed. It should be a subject in the school, because when they're complaining, children don't behave and children don't do that, they have to be taught. It isn't every home know how to behave. It isn't everybody, every parent. But if in the schools they are taught that.
Yes.
Moral instruction. I don't know what name they have it under now, because they have so many different names.
But it's not really reflecting, even if it's been taught, because even at the CFB, back in the day, your school uniform had to be of a certain standard. I've seen some students that are going to school, women, even the men, hands down here, pants, gun mouth, etc. In college, and the ladies.
Oh, they allow it. The teachers allow it, and children can. They look at you like, you have to be consistent with children. You tell them to do this today. I always had my class, because this is what I stand for. I'm not standing for it today and not tomorrow. It must be consistent, so they know exactly the way you stand. Right?
I'm
the teachers at fault. When I had teachers college, they couldn't wear in those days. Students couldn't wear pants to college. They had to wear their uniform. They couldn't wear pants.
Skirts, just about
yes.
Yeah, we call that. We call the days of uniforms going to both schools. When you had to wear uniforms, they had to be of a certain standard, and there was inspection of one at assembly and such. And you go back home and fix it. You know?
Yeah.
Adults. Any adult on the street had the authority to discipline any unruly child. Those days are gone. I mean, the sense of family, you see people sometimes almost in distress, and you have to think twice, should I try to help them because of the change in society? But what bothers me is to see what we accept. I was in Barbados some years ago, and I went out with some friends, and we were at a nightclub. But looking over in an open space, like a parking lot, there was a party. And I'm seeing young people supposed in school. They're smoking and going on, thinking, what's going to happen to the next generation? This is students. Sad to say, it's happening here in St. Kitts.
So you asked me earlier about, being aware and stuff. If you were to ask me, St. Kitts, what the biggest change that I've seen here that I'm really very unhappy with is the two things really, right? Is the what you mentioned earlier is the lack of ability to sort of like, or the feeling you don't have the ability to correct people.
Okay, but yes, okay, this is of course Mr. Mills.
Yeah, so one of the things is the ability to, feel the lack of respect that the young ones seem to have, you know, and for the older people, right? That certainly is disturbing. But probably, and this is probably a direct result of that, is the amount of smoking that goes on openly, smoking of marijuana and stuff, right? That goes on openly in saying, I mean, that was shocking to me how much it is everywhere you walk.
Become accepted.
It has become
as a norm.
People sort of like don't even think
They're
twice about
bolded.
it.
They're bolded. Anyway,
Yeah.
just
Yeah, right, just like that. I mean, that once, but it's not that it didn't happen before, but people would hide and go in corners and stuff like that. But now, you know, in the middle of the street, people are doing this, and I mean, I don't really know what the policies, what the laws are, whether the laws have changed, and I don't really want to cast aspersions on the authorities here, but it doesn't seem to be, nothing seems to be enforced. So if there's a law, it is certainly being ignored. And if there is not, it's a shame that there is not, because, yeah, people do have the right to do certain things, but it leads to different behaviors. Like what you were talking about before, you know, the inability to control yourself, you know, the lack of discipline, I think leads to a lot of the challenges that we're seeing here right now. So,
some years ago, I had an argument with this chap, and he told me point blank, if this was St. Thomas, I'll shoot you. You know, what he was saying, in St. Thomas, I could shoot you and get away with it.
Right.
But he said, I'll kill you. But in St. Kitts, it was known, if you kill somebody, you're facing the gallows.
yeah.
So he was aware of the consequences.
Yeah.
Since they've relaxed all those, I'm not advocating for the gallows, but
Right.
since there was seemingly a relaxation of, you know, certain of the laws or the consequences of certain behavior, it became a free for all.
Yeah.
Guy told me, if this wasn't Thomas, I'll kill yourself. Go ahead, you sing it. But he knew he couldn't sing it. But now is the accepted social norm. You can smoke anywhere.
Yeah.
There's the marijuana commission. They're trying to free up this and that. But that's one aspect of it. But your people, you must be able to have the respect of your people through leadership. And too many of the norms are being relaxed to the point that we don't identify ourselves. You know, even, and I would blame a lot for that, are the DJs on the radio station.
Yeah.
They were guaranteed to play. There are songs that are uplifting, positively, you know, influencing. They don't play them. They play the negativity. I don't want to go to Jamaica, but a lot of the nonsense come from there. At one point, some 80% of Jamaican population is illiterate, but we said to follow them. And we're supposed to be educated people. So that is part of the downfall of people. Following, not really knowing yourself, and following other people's culture, so to speak. And it's similar. I have some neighbors who are Jamaicans. They know nothing about Standing Point. That is why this is important. We have to reach people and remind them of what Standing Point is all about, what singing is all about. Unfortunately, it's a task. So if there's anything you want to touch on, Charlie, anything you want to bring up?
So I actually want to ask my mother a few questions actually also about, certainly about herself and also about my father also. So let's start with you. So you mentioned earlier about going to Bastyr to girls' high school, right? And taking the bus or the truck once a week and coming back at the end of the week, right? The people who you associated with at the girls' high school. So you mentioned, you know, when you were going to the school that you couldn't afford it, you had a scholarship, right? Who were the people, generally speaking, other than the one or two others who had scholarships like you? What were the quote-unquote class of those people who were taking who were getting educated? Is it the average person who was going to high school, or was it more a different kind of people?
Oh, sorry. Yes.
These were people, what we would call the upper class, doctors and lawyers, and people who could afford people, who can afford it. So much so that when comprehensive education started, some of those same people did not want the poorer people to come to, they did not want their children, they said, to mix with their children. They actually took their children away from the school. They actually took their children and send them to Antigua, different schools,
Really?
because they did not want them to mix with ordinary children, cane cutter children and everything like that. It was so in those days.
How did it make you feel?
Well, I'm not part of it. If they ignore them, they ignored me. I mean, that's it. So I know it's not bad. You have to watch them carefully.
And that inspired you to do what? To excel, to show them that you could be
Better.
beautiful.
Let me. I don't know if I should let this go on. When I went to school at first, I used to walk a certain road every day, and there was a girl, always every morning, as if she was waiting for me to pass. And she would say, "What the black girl going Miss Pickard school now?"
She, of course, was of a lighter complexion.
No, she was black. Yeah, she was black. What the black girl going Miss Pickard school? And to tell you the truth, whenever she said that, I would always lift my head high and laugh and go ahead and left her. I mean,
It was not expected for somebody like you to be able to go.
to Miss Pickard school.
Okay.
Because in those days, only children of a certain color, maybe they were not white people. They were brown, you know, the kind of, but in the upper class.
I understand it.
That was it. But strange enough, I went to school with them and we mixed. So I should not really say that the children, we mixed, we played games. To tell the truth, when I was at school, I was this captain of the Gold House. When I went to school, at first I used to have Red House and Blue House. But then after the school became so big, we had to divide up the houses.
Green and orange.
And I put on green, yes.
I was in Orange House
yes.
when it came later on.
I was the captain of the Gold House. They voted for me to be captain, and they had to be vote. You know, they had to vote for you who they want for captain. I was the captain of the Gold House, and we got on very well. So the children themselves, I don't think the children themselves were that
Aware of conscience of.
Yes.
But the parents wanted to.
The parents, yeah. So I enjoy my school life. I used to play games, netball and so forth. We go to Nevis. I was on the team for the netball team. Went to Nevis to play there. Nevis had a high school. The name of the lady was Miss Bridgewater. It was a private school. We played. And we had a very good time. I enjoyed my school life too.
So outside of school, you just gave me a window into your school activities. What about your social life? It wasn't all work, school, home, was it?
No, I used to be doing a lot of church work. I was the organist of the church.
You okay?
I was an
Yes,
organist.
one of your daughters, I recall her doing a recital at one of the schools there on piano. And of course, people like they didn't really appreciate it because it wasn't the jump up calypso. So you were the organist, you said?
Organist of, yes. I was the organist of St. Paul's Church. And I used to have a like needlework class for people and so forth, socially and so forth. I did a lot of that.
So where did you learn the piano? Or music?
I learned music from an old teacher. She died, and her name was Jane Thomas. She taught me music. I didn't, at that time it was organ music. So then I used to play in the Sunday school first, and then I played in the church. But one thing I know is lacking now, they don't have Sunday school now.
Sadly.
No Sunday school.
Sadly.
And I could recall too, in the older days, the schools were the churches.
What touch?
You had to go to church the whole school this afternoon.
Every Wednesday afternoon? Different churches, different days?
Church, yes.
We used to leave the Sunday morning boys' school every Wednesday.
Walk in a line, go down to...
Yes. And then from there you would go home. So the church, I do tours, I'm a tour guide. So even before we get to Sandy Point, I inform my tourists about Sandy Point. To speak about the education system. I point out that when Queen Elizabeth came here, we were standing right in front of the school, start white shirt and a flag, singing God Save the Queen. We talk about things. I speak about the church. Every Wednesday, leaving the school to go to church.
Yes.
Inform them. You have to find out this was a culture in St. Kitts.
Yes.
We say good morning, good afternoon to everybody. So sometimes they come off the ship, they ask me, what time is it? And I answer them, you have to address me. You have to call me, so can you tell me the time, so? About, then I answer you. Or they come off, I say good morning, then they get it. But that's how we were raised. and the school, the church, and the home was on the same page. To the point that if you had bad grades in school or you were unruly, you couldn't go home to your parents with that report. I recall my mother, I was in school yard one day misbehaving, and somebody just grabbed me off the wall and took my mother. And so you find that's important to document how the children was raised, the influence of the school and the church. Yes, we did go to church every Wednesday afternoon. If you were Methodist, you went to your church, Anglican and Central. All that's changed, sadly, as you said. And during the summertime, we used to have vocational school, go to church, etc. All that is gone. So, apart from playing the piano in the church, what else did you do?
I was so occupied with my time because my schoolwork really took up a lot of preparation. I had to do a lot of preparation.
Maybe became a mom.
So would you say that you were the typical, today, you know, this is the day when it wasn't popular, when a working mother, you were the classic working mother, you know, in the 1960s, you know, when it wasn't common for women to be both working and raising children. You want to talk about it a little bit, about your children and what you did for your work and how you balance that?
Yes, I had a lady who used to come in daily, Miss Abbott. I have to thank her greatly because even when I went abroad, she took care of my children, and they were so attached to her. Yes, I had to work. I got up in the morning. When I was living, when I worked at Bethel, I'd get up early and go ahead. But when I worked in Bastille, out all day, I had to go to work for 8 o'clock. I had to get up, get ready, get the children ready. The lady would come and I'll be out all day, and I have this. I could depend on her to take care of the children.
What was her name?
Miss Elizabeth Abbott. She's passed now. I have to thank her greatly.
There was a Miss Abbott I knew about.
I think it's the
Your
same.
daughter named Claudette?
Yes.
Claude, yes, her niece.
Yes.
The same lady.
There I know her.
Claudette grew up with my children.
Yes. I recall her coming along here and walking back. Both. I recall one day Claudette went to shop. I don't know if you sent her out or whatever, but she left going to shop. She had a note of a list of things to buy. She had $5. But she thought she knew all of what she wanted to buy, so she was ripping up a note, going to the shop. When she got to the shop, she got the $5. What the money she was ripping up? What you call Claudette? She wasn't as tall as you, but she was pretty tall. And then, so her mother was the person who...
Her aunt.
Her grandmother.
Yes, her great aunt.
Okay. So yeah, Charlie. So your mother balanced her profession and her home life. And at no time you guys felt, well, mommy's gone out and this and that, so you couldn't misbehave. Yeah, somebody, huh?
Not at all, not at all. I mean, also, plus you should remember, growing up, at least for me, and I'm sure the same thing for Carlin and Sandy, is that in addition to being our mother, she was also the head teacher. Right, so, I mean, it is true, as you said before, is that people did respect the teachers back then and respect the people, and you couldn't do anything because your mother would certainly, give you part of it. But it was definitely so with us because...
You had a responsibility.
Exactly.
Your mom is a head teacher.
Exactly. So
you can't mess up.
I couldn't do anything to embarrass her and stuff like that. And I just said before, the respect, that you have for, your mother is no way I could do anything stupid, right? But both my mother and father, right? I mean, I'll tell you this is, to this day, I tell my children this is, whenever you think about anything, we were talking before about children and the lack of, behavior and stuff like that. When I tell my children, I have 5 children, my wife and I, we have 5 children. And I tell them, whenever you're doing anything, if you ever have any doubts about whether it's right or wrong, ask the question, what would Granny say? Would you be proud if Granny heard about this? Right? If, no matter what you do, if Granny heard, you did this, right?
Would you make up proud?
Would you be embarrassed or would you be proud of that, right? And that is certainly I will tell you, when I was growing up, in the 60s and 70s, that was paramount in my mind, right? Because my mother was a head teacher and then she was teaching training college, and my father was the chief education officer. right? Well respected in the community. People, teacher Miss Mills and teacher Mr. Mills, everybody used to call them that.
Big shoes to fill.
Right? So I definitely was not going to do anything to embarrass them, right? Because I knew sort of like what the expectations were from them, and it wasn't really like I was terrified, right? It was just
an awareness.
It's the right thing to do, right? I wasn't scared or anything like that because, I mean, I never really had any, other than the usual fear of your parents, getting licks. I get my licks. My mother always tells. In fact, she tells the story about how she used to make me. She didn't even beat me. She just took the belt and put it on top of my head, and I was like, I mean, I don't have any recollection of this, right? But I mean, but it's not even that bad. It's really just the fact that the respect that they commanded to this day, right? I mean, I will tell you this, and I say this obviously as a proud son. I talk to people when I'm back home, and people say this, and even when I'm abroad, people without any kind of prompting, please say hi to your mom for me. She do this for me. She did this for me, right? And she, teach Miss Mills this, and it goes on and on and on. The number of people.
That was the name, teacher Miss Mills.
Yeah, who I come across, even folks here in St. Kitts still who are, big in society right now, or who are sort of like, have made it. One person who comes to mind, and she tells me this every time I see her, right, is Joyce Wilshire, right, from up there, right? Yeah. So Joyce always, every time she sees me, she asks me, say it to Miss Mills, because I think you taught her at Teachers College, right? She was taught at Teachers College, right? And she always talks about how she was such an excellent reading teacher, and and this happened. And I gave Joyce his name because you know her and people in Standard Point know her. But this is replicated over and over and over again. So many people, as I come across them, they tell me over and over again, all the difference that she has made in their lives, as an educator and as a decent human being.
As I've said earlier, the Mills name is very respected on many levels, and even though your father was a minister of government eventually, he was a minister of education, was he?
No, Minister of Communications.
Communication?
Yeah.
I would venture that your mother was more popular.
Oh, she was definitely much more known. Well, it depends on the age group. So we should clarify that. Again, the same thing happens with my dad. He just doesn't happen to be alive anymore. But some of the older folks, because my dad taught a generation of people, right? And so some of them tend to be much older. And those older people, I hear this repeatedly about him, about the difference that he made and stuff like that. So there are many people who are still alive, who are still very active, who know my mother, right? But my father, on the contrary to that, he knew an older generation. He has taught the people who probably would have been in the 80s and 90s now, right? So
his contribution would have been at a different level.
Exactly.
Right? But more of a personal one-on-one.
One-on-one. Yeah.
This is your mom.
Well, but he taught in the boys' school, right? He did teach in Standard Point, but he taught, that would have been in what, in the 40s, mommy? When he taught in the boys' school, that would have been in the when Daddy taught in the boys' 40s and 40s. Yeah.
And he taught pupil teachers too.
Yeah.
He taught pupil teachers, Elizabeth Condell and Vanta Ash, but a lot of them, they always ask about him.
Condell's in Bastia?
Yes, Darcy Richardson.
Yes, okay.
He taught them and they always ask about him.
Yeah.
So you got married in 1955, right? Were you living in Standard Point then, or you moved here because of marriage?
I moved here when I got married.
That's the year I was born.
Yeah?
1955.
1955.
Long time ago, we lost about 66 years. That's a milestone. That's a milestone. And you mentioned that last week, Monday, it was a holiday. When I was leaving, you mentioned that you had gone to lay wreath at his.
Really?
And it was days after you realized that was is that an annual ceremony on that day? I'm sorry if I remove from. I won't say the politics. I'm kind of just withdraw from a lot of stuff. So it was a holiday, and I lost the significance of it until I mentioned that you had gone to lay wreath at his grave. I want to thank you for what you were able to share with us, especially about him. Well, you are the central story, but a lot of stuff about him is not really known or glossed over to some extent. At some point, Charlie, what I'm going to do for you is put this on a pen drive. you know, maybe in its raw form so you can view it and look at it. If there's anything you would have missed and you like to put into it,
Actually,
just say, huh?
yes, I do want to add.
Just say.
I don't record this one. Don't record this.
Okay.
So,
Okay, we're recording.
do you have any recollection at all of what happened in 1967? You know, when they had the uprising, etc. Do you have, what recollection do you have of it?
My own recollection is I was at school at that time. It was at the pavilion. I was the head teacher of the infant school then. The high school, you know, was just next door. And I saw, when I looked, my class was on the side of the high school. So as I looked through the window, I saw policemen over there. But then I said maybe they had come for some other thing, like maybe for a child or whatever. Mr. Halliday was in charge of the school at that time, Joseph Halliday. And then afterwards, Miss May, who is
Teacher Miss May?
teacher Miss May, yes,
Okay,
you
go
know.
ahead.
She was teaching, her class was just next to me. So when I looked across at her, I saw her crying. And then I didn't want to disturb her then because she was crying, and at that particular time I said I would ask her. So afterwards I understand, I didn't see what's going on, that police had come there to take Cecil Warner and
Calvin, husband?
Pat Ferrier. Something to do with him. But I really did not go much into it. I didn't know much into it. That's all I saw of it. But then they was talking about what happened and what. And today, to tell the truth, I really don't really understand exactly what it was all about, to tell the truth, you know. I hear people talking about it, really.
I read a book written by Warner Webster. His story is that he actually knew in the book that his thing was to come to St. Kitts to kidnap Robert Fletcher. I read that. I may have a copy still. But he claimed that his parents died young, so he was adopted by the family in St. Martin, who was very well off, and so he benefited. He had gone back to Anguilla and wanted to invest in the infrastructure, lighting, etc., and he appealed to the government here in St. Kitts, and that was happening. So he was using his own money, to cut a long story short. But whatever the issue with Anguillians or himself and Mr. Bradshaw, what he wrote that he had planned to come to St. Kitts and kidnap Mr. Bradshaw. They spoke about what happened in Anguilla when they ejected the police force from down there, put barrels on the runway so planes could land, and all the different things. But as to the role that some personal thinkers would have played, I know many were arrested. There was a state of emergency. The whole place was in an uproar. But people were taken to court, exonerated. So there's still a lot of mystery around the whole thing. But there definitely was an attempt to overthrow the government, whatever the motivation, it did take place. And Sandy Point and some Sandy Pointers would have been suspected of playing a pivotal role in the whole thing. But a lot of it is still conjecture.
I think I heard that they had landed somewhere in Half Retreat.
In Half Retreat, yes.
Something I'd heard about it, and they used to be up and down, and people used to take food to them and whatnot. But
the Dickinsons at Crab Hill. There was a tall gentleman, Mr. Dickinson. He used to drive for CHA, I think it was.
I know Mr.
His wife, yeah, his family was from Anguilla. And it's believed that they sheltered some of the Anguillians and such. As I say,
one of them married to Claude.
Yes, Juliet.
Yes.
She became the wife of my brother Claude Joseph. She's still around.
Oh, she is? Yeah, she's
in the UK. Sorry, she's in the US. She goes back and forth.
What are you saying? I know Miss Dickinson, and she had his family.
So it's believed that they were part of it, or they helped the shelter. So we had that. We lost the exchange. There was a fire on the same time that burned out what we call the exchange, the telephone post office
fire, yes.
up there, yes, and that property is still the same.
Yes.
And there you've had it. Another episode of the Story of Sandy Point, a production of the Sandy Point Heritage Society, and we have been featuring in the last 3 or 4 episodes the interviews or segments of the interviews done with Mistress Sylvia Mills. We want to thank her family for the invaluable contribution they have made for the development of Sandy Point, St. Kitts by extension, and in particular to the story of Sandy Point. Thank you. Okay. So you got 2 intros to